First question, please. The gentleman in the brown shirt had a question, I think, before. Can you just state your name and your organisation and a brief question, please?
Hello. Hello. My name is Joko. I'm from Greenpeace. Thank you for inviting us. And actually, my questions is really related with probably Paul, Jeremy, and also Nikki. It's related with what can the industry do to answer the questions that have been raised here related to sustainability. Not only the industry, but also the investors, and also, for example, the initiatives such as the disclosure for resources companies. For example, in terms of moratorium in Indonesia, actually we see moratorium as a solution, but what can the industries do to help such a solution provided by the government to help separate the industry expansion from deforestation and peatland clearings?
Okay,
Yeah.
Joko's question is specifically, what does the industry, and maybe Paul has something to say about that as well, how can they have an impact? So I'm going to hand over to Paul first.
One very, very short sentence. We've heard a lot of bad things happening here today, some real concerns. And it's all money. It's just all money. Money pulls resources out of the ground. Money does it all. And I absolutely reject any suggestion that India or China doesn't care about this. We're all people, we're all human, and we all care about injustice. And it simply is about communicating with the public, because it is in the public's name and with the public's money these bad deeds are being done.
Okay, over to Jeremy, I think.
I think I'd like to follow on from Paul. I totally concur with what you just said, and I certainly agree with you with regards to China and India. I think, Joko, one of the things which I think is quite important is that when the RSPO actually came up with their first certification for United Plantations a few years ago, it was actually undermined, and that actually brought the actual industry and the incentives for people to come onto the bandwagon and improve practices. It really set them back, and I think the constant undermining of the RSPO doesn't help. I really think that, even though you're not members of the RSPO, you should actually support the process, because, can you imagine a world today without the RSPO? I think it'd be a lot worse. So I think certain support for the RSPO, of course it's not a perfect organization, but it's certainly a result of multi-stakeholder collaboration, and it's a pretty credible standard that you have. So perhaps support for the RSPO as opposed to undermining the RSPO would certainly help the industry.
Can we just specifically touch on the issue of what the industry can do in terms of the moratorium and support for the moratorium? I think, Pak Joko, that's what you wanted. Anybody from the floor like to speak on that point specifically, or Jeremy?
Well, with regards to the moratorium, I mean, if the Indonesian government doesn't give out concessions for agriculture over the next couple of years, then there shouldn't be any expansion. But it doesn't say that previous concessions given out over the last few years, that won't continue. I certainly think that will continue, because that's in process. But perhaps for the next couple of years, you're going to see a slowdown. But I'm not of the opinion that a moratorium is the solution, because you're still going to get land grabs. You're still going to get local communities and people in poverty also helping themselves to the forest, and that doesn't really solve your problem either. There's certainly going to be continued peatland burning and slash and burn practices. So it doesn't answer the actual systemic problems of the industry.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll probably continue that also with that portion of the Q&A in the forestry section, I should think, because we'll definitely cover the moratorium, David, in your session. Any other questions from the floor? Hi, sorry, I didn't know your name.
I'm Victoria. Hi, I'm Victoria, Science and Environment Reporter for the Straits Times. There's been a lot of talk of how to communicate to the public, and obviously mainstream media is one way of doing that. Can I get advice and views on mainstream reporting of palm oil, please? And how willing industry and everyone is to speak to journalists about this issue?
Maybe Cherie can answer to start off with, and then...
I think it is very important to bring the awareness that there is an alternative, and that is certified and sustainable palm oil. I believe that a lot of the tension, the tension now between industry is the issue where there is a focus only on bad companies and what bad companies are doing. I think there needs to be a greater emphasis, and I think the RSPO too has to come out and highlight what are some of the practices of good companies, what are some of the companies that are moving in terms of their commitments towards certification, and how can the media actually write and find these good stories. I think that's quite important.
Thank you. Yes, Jeremy had a couple of words there.
Sorry,
Maybe
just
Edgar
very quickly.
afterwards.
Thanks, Victoria. That's a really, really good question. I just want to bring up a very quick example of the problems that we've faced as well. We've been inundated with requests from media to actually go down and have a look at our plantations. And, you know, in the past couple of months, we've actually, you know, agreed to some of these requests. But the problem is, the result was always completely different to what it was portrayed to be. And the problem with the palm oil industry today, that it's far sexier to write a bad story about us than a good story. Good stories just don't sell about us. And certainly in places like Australia very recently and Europe, that's the problem. So from my perspective, balanced journalism as opposed to what I call irresponsible journalism, which, you know, we see far too much in this, because it just is better for a bad story for you guys.
Okay, Edgar.
Well, maybe I fully agree on that. I think because the NGOs are so vocal in the press, and I know the NGOs have very good media people in their teams. I spoke to a CFO of a large listed company in Indonesia, and he says we have actually been reducing our communication with the media for the last 2 years. We don't go for quarterly news anymore. We give the numbers, we don't do press releases, nothing. And the reason why is because every time they come in the news, an NGO is going to go after them. So if you can continue to keep doing that, they will become more and more quiet. I mean, sorry, the NGOs have not been the nicest also. And I know that one example, the first sustainable palm oil that went to Europe, that was one NGO. I mean, I think that's an effort. Whatever the company does, maybe other things, that was a real effort. What does one of the big NGOs, I think you are here in the you send out a report accusing that company, who has been the first to put sustainable palm in Europe, accusing of doing something else wrongly at some results plantations. And these, I mean, if you want to have a debate, you should be open and you should be, you know, a lot more friendly to them and let them also speak out. I think the NGOs have been very, very bad in the media coverage.
Yeah. And I'm going to pass over to David in a sec, but I just also wanted to say that in terms of information, one of the complaints that investors have is that companies don't release very much information and on sustainability issues and detailing issues on plantation activities. But I would really encourage everybody to read the annual reports. There's a lot of information in annual reports that never gets absorbed by the investment community, and there's a huge amount of effort that goes in by companies reporting on issues in their annual reports and in their listing documents. So, David, did you have also something to say on that?
Well, just as a reporter who
Sorry,
has
the
done...
mic's not on. No.
I'm probably not speaking loud enough. You know, just as a reporter who has written a little bit about palm oil, particularly on the climate change sort of side of things, I tend to find that palm oil companies, and some of the larger ones, are actually quite secretive, which doesn't help their image. And maybe that's because they have had a lot of bad publicity, which is true. There are a whole range of palm oil companies, and you can't put them all in the same box, basically. That's quite unfair. And I think Nikki might have a better idea than me, but I do find a lack of willingness to engage. And I see if you email some of these companies, they don't respond, or they just give you a one-line answer, and that doesn't really help either. So my message to you is perhaps if you want to really illustrate what you're doing and how things are changing and how you are dealing with all these issues, as I think you clearly are, be out there and be willing to sort of engage a bit more.
Great. Yeah, I think most investors and stakeholders would join that call for collaborative action by the industry as well. What would be great from our perspective would be to see a map that is updated showing which concessions are owned by who and where and how long they're valid for. It seems like a really simple thing to get, but it's impossible. Sorry, Simon, would you like to say something? And then probably one more question and then we'll break for tea.
Simon Lord, New Britain Palm Oil, Papua New Guinea. I think 2 years ago, the first ever CSR sustainable reports to the journalist were released by two oil palm companies, one in Malaysia, one in Papua New Guinea. Now I think this year there's 7 that have been released. It's slow, we are slow, and I think that's regrettable, but we are getting slightly better. And I think those reports are to GRI, G3 guidelines in most cases, and therefore I think they link between performance and engagement. So it's a reform of reporting, they're complete, they are material, and they are responsive. And I think those companies, you would get a better response if you approach those on more general issues.
Thank you, Simon. That's a very interesting perspective. So I've got a chance for one more question, and I think your hand was up first, sir. Sorry.
Thanks. Tim, representing Enviromarkets. I just wanted to bring up a point that Nikki had in her presentation, which was that there's a premium of $15 to produce sustainable palm oil, and which is about 1% of the cost. And the analyst came up with the idea of how about governments impose a 1% tax on unsustainable palm oil production? And I just wanted to ask, is that, and I guess that would be Indonesia and Malaysia, is that practical? And if it's...
I think it was on imported palm oil, right? Or imported into Europe, for example.
Okay, so as an example,
way,
how
right?
about export?
Mm-hmm.
If Malaysia and Indonesia it would be a fundraising exercise for them, balance it out. Is that practical? And if so, is there any kind of concerted lobbying going on in these countries?
That's right. Just to let you know, I think the industry's already quite sore that they have lots of taxes to pay versus the soybean farmers who get $10 billion worth of subsidies a year. So I certainly don't think that's going to become very popular if the governments actually do that. There are already importation taxes into Europe. For example, if you send Malaysian or Indonesian crude palm oil into Europe, there's already a 3.8% tax. If it's refined, it goes up to 9 or 10. So for that to happen, I don't think that's going to be very realistic. I think there are other ways to actually incentivize the market.
But if sorry to butt in, but if there was a differential between certified and non-certified, all the companies that were certified would benefit because they would be produced.
There's already a premium that's being paid for the RSPO oil. So you're trying to say that there's an additional sort of tax on the premium, or tax as well as a premium?
No, I think what he's saying is if you're sustainably certified, then you wouldn't pay any tax. It's those companies that are not sustainably certified that they
so
would
far
pay.
the governments haven't actually been, haven't taken on the RSPO as the de facto standard for the industry. That's certainly something which hasn't happened. And unfortunately, the Indonesian governments, Indonesian authorities have actually recently come up with their own version of the RSPO called the ISPO. So we're not sure how that's going to work as well and how credible that will be in Europe. So there is certainly an issue there, and the governments haven't taken this on board. So right now they need to be a stakeholder on board the RSPO before that can happen.
I do believe, however, that there is a role that governments can play to look at actually purchasing certified sustainable palm oil for the country, for the consumers. And I think that's something that we're not doing enough to actively lobby governments to do.
One just tiny point that governments find it almost impossible to agree the Kyoto Protocol, and there are terrible arguments about Kyoto Protocol, and it seems to be ripping the world apart, the Kyoto Protocol. But the gas price differential between the United States and the EU is, in its fiscal significance, significantly larger than the entire Kyoto Protocol. The cars in the two countries look completely different, and driving habits are completely different, and that already exists. So there are all kinds of things possible.
I think that's a great point to leave it on. All kinds of things are possible, and the people in the room are those that possibly have the solutions to the challenge ahead. So on that note, we'll break for tea, and I need to thank everybody who participated in the panel and came from thousands of miles away. Thank you.